Hey guys, I am, as you can see, in the classroom, which is very empty and very quiet. Not quite the same without you guys. Um, I'm hoping that I can bypass the technical difficulties I went through yesterday with trying to get things posted. I just did Miss Goodwin's reading session for today, and it went relatively well, so I think I've gotten past a lot of the hiccups. So I'm going to do chapters 8 and 9 because they're both kind of short. Do chapters 8 and 9 of our book, Sink or Swim. So here we go. If you remember, where we last left off, Colton had just gotten his first paycheck. It's at the end of boot camp, and of course he sends a note to his mom, sends all the money minus what little bit he needed, sent most of the money back to his mom, and in a letter he actually comes clean about not being in Morehead City like he originally told her when he left. He still can't tell her where he's at, but he did assure her that he's fine and that he's got some friends. So we're going to see what happens after that. So we're going to pick up with chapter 8. A lot of guys' families came for graduation day from boot camp, but not mine or Woody's or Spinelli's. Straub's mom and dad came, though. They lived in Ohio, so it wasn't too far for them to drive, and they adopted the rest of us for the afternoon. For once, we got to sit at the long tables in the visitor center with baskets, coolers of decent drinks and chow, instead of having to wait for everybody's leftovers on visiting day. Mr. and Mrs. Straub were both as big as their son, and it turned out that they were originally from Germany. Some people sitting nearby kept glancing over suspiciously when they heard the Straubs' accents, which maybe was partly why the Straubs weren't shy about telling us in their loud, booming German voices how much they hated Hitler, as if anybody might have had any doubts. "What they say about him," Mrs. Straub said, "he is nothing but a bully all his life. Only he has his brown shirts. They do his bullying for him. And now his Nazis. He is a poison on the earth." Mr. Straub agreed. He listed all the countries in Europe that Hitler had conquered in order, a list Mrs. Straub punctuated by saying "Mein Gott" after each one. Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Yugoslavia, Greece. But when he finished, he said, "But not Great Britain, and not America." Then he changed the subject, encouraging us to eat more of these sausages he called bratwurst, and this funny thing they did to cabbage that he called sauerkraut, and this heavy sweet dessert called strudel. We got so stuffed that when Mrs. Straub launched into her "I hate Hitler" rant again, all I could do was sit there and not move except to nod my head, and then finally I just dozed off in my chair. Later that afternoon after my nap, the Navy had us do some marching drills on the grinder, with all the officers and some politicians sitting on a reviewing stand for us to salute as we went past. The families huddled in the cold March wind off to the side and applauded and cheered. Made us feel like we were real Navy now, ready to go off and fight the Germans and the Japanese and be heroes. When it was over and Chief dismissed us for the last time, he said, "Men, I know I've been hard on you from day one, and some of you hate me for it. As true as that may be, there will come a time when you will thank me, because as hard as you think it's been here in boot camp, it will be 100 times harder out there. Harder to survive the boredom of days and days at sea with nothing happening. Harder to survive conditions on the ocean so terrible you won't think your ship or you can possibly survive. Harder to keep your wits about you when bombs are going off all around you or hitting your ship. Harder to watch your shipmate perish right in front of your eyes and know that you can't do anything for him and that you have to keep your head on, focus on your job, and stay in the fight. The Navy has prepared you the best we can up to this point. Your job from here on out is simple: to protect the United States of America, defeat Germany and Japan, save the world." He paused, then saluted and said, "Dismissed." I went up to him afterward. "I just wanted to thank you, Chief," I mumbled, still a little scared of him. He looked at me for a long time before he spoke. "Son," he said, "it's not too late to go home. I know I should have said something before. There's a lot of pressure to recruit and train as many men as we can as fast as we can for the war effort. But truthfully, you don't belong here. You and I both know you're way too young for this." I didn't know what to say, though he waited. In that moment, I wanted to go home. I knew I wasn't ready for whatever was coming next, which would take me even closer to the war, closer to getting shot at by U-boats, and farther away from my family. I clenched my jaw. I wasn't going to quit, though. I just wasn't. I couldn't let Danny and Mama down, and with my teeth still clenched, I told him that. Chief took off his hat and scratched his scalp. Then he shook his head. "Just don't go get yourself killed," he said. "Or if you do, make sure you take a whole lot of those Germans down with you." Chapter 9. 2 days later, Woody and me, now both seamen second class, were on a train for Miami, of all places, to the new Subchaser Training Center they just opened down there. It was the end of March, still winter on Lake Michigan, so we were ready for the tropics. Chief had come through on my request for Woody to go with me, even though I wasn't sure why I had been asking, except that Woody had begged me to. "He's your headache now," Chief had told me, shaking his head. "In a better Navy, he'd already been tossed out on his butt." "I'm sure he'll do all right, Chief," I'd replied, though I wasn't at all sure. But like Chief said, Woody was my headache now. Once boot camp was behind us and we were rolling south on the train, he turned back into the Woody he'd been before, the one I first met on the bus 5 weeks earlier, talking non-stop about anything and everything back home in Kinston. I pulled my sailor cap down over my face, closed my eyes, and quit listening. Eventually, he must have run out of things to say. Maybe he fell asleep, too. Probably in the middle of a sentence. Straub was off to artillery training school on the West Coast. Spinelli had gotten his request for a desk job and was shipping out for New York. So basically, he was going home, or pretty close to it. We all said we'd keep in touch. I didn't know about them, but I meant it. I couldn't imagine how I'd have gotten through basic training without them, even Woody. I fell asleep on the long train ride down to Miami, and when I did, I dreamed about me and Danny. Not the day of the U-boat, but another day, not long after Dad died, when we went riding on our beach ponies, splashing in and out of the surf, kicking up so much sand it felt like rain falling. Only the sun was full and hot and bright overhead. Everything looked silver. In my dream, we were still riding, and Danny was still beside me on his pony, and we weren't sad about Dad because his dying wasn't real, and it seemed like we could go on like that forever, just 2 kids running wild and free on Ocracoke Island. It got hotter and hotter the further south we went. By the time we got to Miami, it was hard to remember how cold it had been in Illinois just 2 days before. We wouldn't be wearing our peacoats down here, that was for sure. A Navy truck took us to our quarters, and we couldn't believe it when we got there. It was this famous giant hotel on Biscayne Boulevard called the Everglades. Only they had emptied the tourists out of it so they could house all of us sailors and officers coming into town for subchaser school. "I ain't never seen anything this big or this fancy," Woody marveled. I was thinking the same thing, but didn't want to say it out loud. All the fanciness ended inside, though. They had pulled up carpet and taken pictures and anything else of any value off the walls, so the Everglades was just a stripped-down version of what it used to be. Woody and I shared a room that had cots instead of beds, but we didn't mind, because at least we didn't have to sleep on hard bunks the way we had at Great Lakes. The mess hall in the Everglades dining room, which was enormous, but just like the rest of the hotel, no longer anything fancy. Same old Navy chow. Cooks threw big portions of everything on our trays, all pretty much running together, and if there was dessert, they plopped that down on top of the meat and potatoes and peas. Ice cream started melting right away, so we had to eat that first, of course. "I don't know why I never thought of doing it this way all along," Woody said, ice cream dribbling down his chin. I shoved a napkin at him. "Don't save the best for last. Save it for first." "Well, then you wouldn't exactly be saving it," I said. Woody just shrugged. Then he insisted that we toast our first meal in Miami by clinking spoons full of melted ice cream. The commanding officer of the Subchaser Training Center was Lieutenant Commander Eugene McDaniel. They herded all of us into a giant room at the training center after dinner for what was supposed to be orientation, but was instead just him, a small skinny guy with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked really mad, and it turned out he was. "I do not want to be here," he began. "I want to be absolutely clear about that. I am only here because I was so ordered. I would rather be at sea fighting those Nazi beasts. No mistake about it. They must be hunted down and they must be destroyed. You will be the ones to do that, and if you're not committed to the cause, then I want you transferred out of this command immediately. When I came here, the Navy sent me 6 officers. I sent 3 of them back because they did not have sufficient training, experience, or, frankly, the guts and determination to get the job done. You may have heard that a civilian merchant unloaded his produce on a Navy pier and that I had it tossed. That story is true. That was my dock, strictly to be used for training. There's a war going on, and I do not have time or patience for anybody or anything that gets in the way of our winning it." A guy elbowed me in the ribs. "Sounds like it's true what they say about him." "What's that?" I asked. "Looks like a professor, but fights like a pirate." Lieutenant Commander McDaniel continued, his voice getting even sharper. "I have seen the fury of the Nazi submarine onslaught from first-hand encounters with their U-boats. They are highly trained, they are stealthy, and they are murderous. They are going after our cargo ships and fully intend to cripple our war effort. Without supplies, our allies cannot defend themselves. Without the weapons we supply, without the oil and food and other material support we ship to them, the war against the Nazis will be lost. Without supplies for ourselves, we cannot defeat anybody. Right now, the Nazis are winning. If their rate of success sinking our supply ships in the North Atlantic continues, by this summer we will have lost hundreds of ships and thousands of men aboard those ships. These are men who are risking and losing their lives for the Allied cause. We will not allow this to continue. You will take the training you receive here, and you will then take the fight to the Nazis, and you and I will defeat them." He paused, took off his glasses, wiped them with a handkerchief, and put them back on. "As you leave here today, I want you to look at something I have placed right outside, so you can see it every day of your training. It is, or was, a lifeboat. 2 months ago, a Navy destroyer went to the aid of a British cargo ship that had been hit by torpedoes. I was on that destroyer. By the time we arrived, the ship was sinking, so we began the search for survivors. Lookout spotted a lifeboat, the lifeboat you will see outside this room. No one on it was alive. It was riddled with bullet holes, splattered with blood, and littered with dead sailors." He paused again. He picked up a glass of water and drank some, then continued. "What that meant, gentlemen, in case you are unfamiliar with how the Nazi beasts operate, is that after torpedoing the British ship, the U-boat surfaced, approached the lifeboat, and instead of taking prisoners, as is required under international law, they uncovered their deck guns and machine gunned those helpless, defenseless merchant sailors. We gave those sailors a proper burial at sea. I ordered their lifeboat lifted onto the ship and had it placed on the training grounds, bullet holes, blood stains, and all, as a constant visual reminder of why you are here." "Old blood and guts," the guy sitting next to me said. "That's what they call him, and I can see why." I nodded, and so did Woody, sitting next to me on the other side. We saw the bloody lifeboat when we filed out. It was sitting in the sand under a couple of low palm trees. All the bullet holes were marked with rings of white paint, and there were a lot of them, too many to count. There were dark stains inside the boat, soaked into the wood. I felt a chill just looking at it, even though it was sunny out and a hot 80 degrees. And that's the end of chapter 9, and where we'll stop for today. Stay tuned tomorrow. I'll read the next one. So I will look to see you guys online again tomorrow. Remember, if you guys have any questions about anything, please feel free to reach out through the Facebook group, Remind, email. We also sent home in the packets about the free conference call. Will be available 9 to 11 and 1 to 3 starting tomorrow, Monday through Friday. Again, we're here to help you with anything as we make the best of what's going on. Miss you guys.